How's it going, everyone? It's Harvey from Weather 200,000, and in this video, we're going to focus on Invest 98L, which is likely to become a hurricane in the very near future, and determine the impacts you should experience throughout the Caribbean islands, and including potentially the Yucatan Peninsula, and determine if this potential hurricane will impact the United States as a major hurricane. But before I begin, make sure to subscribe if you want to see more weather-related content. So take a look at the current water vapor MG for Invest 98L, which is currently just to the east of the Leeward Islands. We do see that there isn't a lot of thunderstorm activity going on, as pretty much the northerly flow in the upper levels of the atmosphere is pushing a lot of that thunderstorm activity towards South America rather than keeping it over the Atlantic Ocean, which is the reason why it hasn't really developed a well-defined and close center of circulation just yet, because all the convection is occurring over land where there's a lot of friction, of course, and there isn't a high enough level of convection for this to develop into tropical storm just yet. The stronger upper level winds we're seeing is associated with this upper level high that's right over Hurricane Fiona, believe it or not, where we're seeing the outflow bring stronger upper level winds over Invest 98L at this time, which is drifting thunderstorm activity further southward, and the mid-level low further southward, which is the reason why we haven't seen Tropical Storm Hermine form just yet. But it's still likely that we're going to see at least a tropical depression or tropical storm within the next 48 hours, and if not, within pretty much guaranteed within the next 5 days, as it does seem like the wind shear associated with Hurricane Fiona will be enough to really hinder this storm when it comes to developing a well-defined center of circulation. So we should see a tropical storm in the very near future, but the strengthening should be slower as a result of the upper level winds we're seeing over Invest 98L at this time, which is expected to continue until Hurricane Fiona moves further northward, to where it'll have an open area to where most likely it will be the conditions will be favorable enough for this to develop into a hurricane. Taking a look at the upper level at the wind shear map over the entire northern Atlantic, and we do see the strong upper level winds coming from the north associated with Hurricane Fiona. This is as a result of, like I said, this upper level high that's currently over Hurricane Fiona, bringing those strong upper level winds over this storm. But as this storm continues to head further westward and Hurricane Fiona continues to move further northward, we're going to see those upper level winds subside in the Caribbean for this to have an open opportunity to develop eventually into a hurricane, which is the most likely scenario at this time. We have a 70% chance this develops within the next 48 hours and 90% chance within the next 5 days. Now, take a look at what the computer models are stating, and unfortunately, it seems like both of the two computer models are in bigger disagreement than they were yesterday, because if we were to take a look at the GFS model now wants to take potential tropical storm or Hurricane Hermine further westward, and it's going to be somewhat difficult to exactly track where this storm goes, because it depends also on its initial strength just to the south of the Caribbean islands. Because if this storm is a little bit stronger, then of course the circulation of the storm will overall be taller as a result of taller cloud tops, which means that the upper level winds would manipulate the storm's path a little more. And since the upper level winds are coming from the north, that would favor the storm, that would steer the storm a little bit further southward, since the upper level winds are pushing it towards the south. So if this storm were a little bit stronger initially, then we should see a track for a southward before turning up north. However, if the storm's a little weaker, like what the European model is forecasting, then we should see a storm circulation move a little bit further northward, to where potentially Jamaica would get more involved, and Cuba, and this would turn northward to to maybe where Florida gets more involved rather than, let's say, the Florida Panhandle. So there's still a lot of uncertainty when it comes to the track forecast, because it really all depends on its initial strength. If this storm's stronger, the upper level winds will manipulate the storm's projected path a little bit more and steer it further southward, since the storm circulation is overall taller with taller cloud tops. However, when the storm's weaker, the cloud tops are a lot shorter, and the overall composition of the storm is a lot shorter, so the upper level winds will have less of an effect with this storm, and the surface winds will play more of a factor when determining the track, and that would steer the storm further northward, like what the European model is stating. So I'll keep you guys updated regarding any changes with the forecast. We're gonna need to wait and see over the next several days how strong this disturbance becomes, because that will determine and raise definitely the certainty of where the storm goes. However, it seems inevitable at this point that I'd say past the point of Jamaica, we're gonna see a very rapidly strengthening tropical cyclone in our hands, and we'll likely see a hurricane based on all the factors that we're seeing as this approaches the Western Caribbean. Because if I were to show you guys the wind shear map over the next several days, it does become concerning once it goes into the Western Caribbean, where the wind shear will quickly wind down. So taking a look at the wind shear map, give me just 1 second here. So taking a look at the wind shear over tropical, Invest 98L, right just to the east of the Leeward Islands, we do see that there's a moderate level wind shear over the storm as a result of the existence of this upper level high over Hurricane Fiona, which would steer the storm a little bit further southward if it were a little bit stronger. But the European model expects the storm to remain weak for the most part. But we do see, as if I were to continue to move, Fiona continues to move northward, we see the wind shear begin to subside, which would allow for a very open area for this storm to organize itself and really strengthen and rapidly intensify as it heads further westward, which is definitely a major concern, where the wind shear will be very light. And unfortunately, it doesn't seem like there's going to be a strong level of upper level of dry air to really hinder this storm as well. If we were to take a look at the relative humidity forecast over the next several days, we're going to see that there isn't going to be a lot of dry air that's going to inhibit this storm either. So taking a look back at the Western Atlantic, there really isn't going to be much when it comes to dry air, which would allow the storm to strengthen a little bit more as this heads further westward. And in terms of how much this will strengthen, it does become concerning, because we still have both of the computer models leaning towards developing a major hurricane in the very near future, which is definitely something we're going to need to pay very, very close attention to, where we see a 972 millibar storm just south of Cuba. And we do see the European model wants to take landfall towards the southwestern portion of Florida. There's still a lot of time to iron out the forecast, but you see this is only 7 days away from impacting Florida. So we're almost approaching that time period where the forecast will become more certain that we most likely this will move northward to the Gulf of Mexico. There's still that possibility it could move just to the east of Florida, which is still which would be the best case scenario, I'd say, because it would miss out on bringing any direct impacts to the United States. But of course, Cuba and Jamaica need to be concerned if it were to take a track northward that quickly. But at this point, it seems like the chance that this moves out to sea just to the east of the southeast is less likely, as I think the most likely scenario at this point is that this will move somewhere north into the Gulf of Mexico, which puts pretty much the entire Gulf Coast at risk. And it seems like the GFS model is taking even more concerning forecast when it comes to its strength, because if I were to continue to move forward, for one thing is that the GFS model is a lot slower in bringing this to the United States, because at the 175 hour mark, where the European model already wants to bring a landfall towards southwestern Florida, but in the GFS model scenario, it's still just beginning to enter the Gulf of Mexico, just coming off the Yucatan Peninsula, but it still poses a high risk for a landfalling hurricane for the southern Gulf Coast. And we see the GFS model wants to strengthen this to a scary level, down to 938 millibars, which is equivalent close to nearly a Category 5 hurricane right on the Gulf Coast coast doorstep, which is definitely very concerning. We're gonna need to wait and see, but it seems like the wind shear will be just light enough for this to develop not only into a hurricane, but likely a major hurricane as well. We're just gonna need to see. But there could be inhibiting factors as this approaches the Gulf of Mexico, because since there's going to be a big trough moving through, that's going to be the main catalyst in steering this northward. There could be a little bit more dry. There could be a little bit more dry air associated with this cold front, which would definitely stabilize the center of circulation a little bit for the storm to be a little bit weaker, which would certainly be a bear case scenario. And of course, along with this dip in the jet stream, we could see a higher level of upper level winds. However, I think at this point we're bound to see a very strong storm approach the Gulf of Mexico at this time, which is definitely very concerning. And the southern United States needs to at least have high awareness with this storm, because there is an increasing possibility that it'll impact somewhere the United States, somewhere along the Gulf Coast. So you need to pay close attention to that. And in terms of the Caribbean islands like Cuba, the Yucatan Peninsula, and Jamaica, you also need to pay attention. While it seems like a lot of the ensemble members want to take this just to the south of Jamaica, there's still the possibility it could directly impact you guys in Jamaica, so you need to pay close attention to that. Really, the steering current, what really will depend on the steering current will be how strong it is initially. If it's a little stronger, it'll move southward. If it's a little weaker, it'll move northward. So make sure to be aware of that over the next several days if you want a better idea of where the storm will go over the next several days. And of course, it also really depends on this dip in the jet stream. If this dip is a little stronger, then we could expect it to turn northward a little earlier. But if it's a little weaker, then we could expect a track a little bit further southward, to where maybe Central America gets more involved and potentially the western portion of the Gulf Coast. So we're going to need to pay very close attention to this over the next several days. But I'd say at this point, a hurricane is likely. Now, taking a look at what the ensemble members are stating when it comes to the strength and the projected path, we do see that there's a wide array of possibilities from the GFS ensemble members. However, it seems like the average is leaning towards bringing this to Gulf of Mexico. However, we do have some wanting to take this just to the east of Florida, so the east coast of Florida would also should also be aware of this. However, we do have a decent amount of them wanting to take this further southward, closer to the Yucatan Peninsula in Central America. So if you live along the Yucatan Peninsula, Belize, and into Guatemala and Nicaragua, you need to pay a little bit of closer attention to this, because we could see more significant impacts if this storm were to move a little bit further southward. So make sure to keep that in mind. In terms of what the model intensity guidance is saying, it's very concerning, because a majority of them want to take this to at least major hurricane status beyond the right around or a little bit beyond the 5-day mark. So I'd say there's definitely something to pay close attention to. A hurricane is very likely at this time, and potentially a major hurricane is becoming increasingly likely, since the wind shear and the stable air will be nearly non-existent as this heads into the western Caribbean, which would allow this invest to have an open area to rapidly intensify. Now, taking a look at my track and strength forecast when it comes to potential Hurricane Hermine. So over the next 3 days, I'm expecting this to gradually intensify as a tropical storm, very slowly intensify, because like I said, the upper level winds that are coming from Hurricane Fiona's outflow will hinder this storm a bit, since the mid-level and the surface level low won't be in the same area, since the upper level winds will sort of push the mid-level low closer to South America, which would force the storm to be a little bit less organized and vertically stacked for the wind speed to maximize itself. But I do expect eventually this storm should organize itself, probably right around the point where it reaches Jamaica when it comes to longitude, and then I expect a rapid intensification process after that, where by Monday we could have a category 2 to borderline category 3 on our hands, and by Tuesday I'm expecting a major hurricane to potentially enter the Gulf of Mexico. So there's definitely something you want to be aware aware of throughout Cuba, the Yucatan Peninsula, Jamaica, and even other countries in Central America, because there's still a large area where this storm could move. So make sure to pay close attention to this throughout the Caribbean islands, and make sure to just be aware for that possibility of a hurricane in the southern Gulf of Mexico. But anyways, guys, I thank you guys for watching. Make sure to subscribe if you want to see more weather content, and I hope you guys have a great day.